Hello and welcome to another video. So we're going to be taking a look at Mysteria budget deck. Why Mysteria budget deck? Because it was on the Mana Surge tier list and it was quite decent. So I actually really do enjoy playing Mysteria. It's a lot of fun, it's got a lot of options, and there's a few ways you can go about building it. There are a few cards you can swap in and out of most decks, which make it fairly easy to do, which is great. And in this case, they're reasonably cheap. So your top end for golds, you're just running those 6 golds for your top end. Of course you want Light Mage and you want Prodigy. Otherwise everything else is bronze and silver, which makes this deck reasonably inexpensive. Of course with a lot of Mysteria cards, you really want to be just playing them on curve, getting as much as you can out on board at once, and really just playing in that way. Lightning Lance is the only card I didn't like a lot in this deck personally. I might try to swap that out for something else in the future if I ever try to cover a budget deck like this one and there's nothing else out. Disciple of Truth, surprisingly I enjoyed a lot. Its Accelerate 1, Restore 1 is actually really decent, 1 for 1 card, and spell boosting our Fate's Hands was always going to be an important card. Otherwise it's just Mysteria synergy to get off the really big Prodigy. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it and we're going to get right into it. So, kicking us off, we're going up against Haven. This is where this deck actually can do fairly well. RuneCraft typically is quite powerful. Especially in the current meta of slower decks, RuneCraft tends to have a slight edge. But in this situation, we can actually do fairly well. Of course, if Haven has a perfect hand, it's pretty much impossible for a budget deck to stop it. But overall, if you can stall out long enough, you only need to get one decent hit to their face, and that isn't impossible. The only real trouble you'll run into is if they're running Exalia, or Exalia, whatever it is, the one that limits your damage to face. If they play that, it's pretty much game over at that point. You really can't come back from that, which is the only real downfall to this, as it's an extremely hard counter. Otherwise, you can pretty much just play casually and not really have to worry too much about how you go about things. So, Mysterian Summoner. Usually I like to get some more value out of that card, but sometimes just playing it out is all you can really do. So the Haven player started off really strong, honestly. It was a little worrisome that they were starting off so strong in this match. Having to deal with these big-bodied cards is not something this deck typically does great. But I decided to go for as much Mysteria as I could here, trying to get my hands down as low as I could, while taking full advantage on the Evo and the Light Mage, and trying to kill the Unevolved so they can't take advantage of the damage buff with the Evo points that they have. Even though I might take a little bit of extra damage, I was going to be completely okay with that, if it meant that I could limit what they could actually do to me. So Magic Missile is perfect, Into a Note is even better. And that's great, another Anne. So we're actually going to have a pretty mass play now. We have Mysterian Right, which is going to be a really good card, along with Triple Anne. So that's almost an ideal hand there. As long as we can continue to get Mysteria cards, which considering we have 2 Fate's Hands, both on 3, shouldn't be impossible. And the knowledge off the top is really going to help us out. Really start to close this game up as quickly as we can, buffing our hand. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, because our opponent could very easily just drop Exalia next turn and really lock us out. I decided to go for my Fate's Hand draws, mainly looking for anything Mysteria related, which I probably should have done first, but it didn't really end up mattering, as we got more than enough chance here. Beacon of Salvation is a little rough. It does clear out a lot of this, but we should be able to stay ahead of their healing, getting as much damage on them as possible with these Mysteria cards, so that's really no worry at all. Magic Mentor, with the Evo, is going to get us another Mysteria card. And now we can actually use Anne plus the Anne's Sorcery, and the Anne's, I'm not sure what that one was, Anne's Soldier, I think? Either way. We can use the Anne cards really effectively next turn to stall turn 9, which is pretty much the only aim we've got, other than boosting Anne's Sorcery up even further. Which, with the amount of Mysteria cards we have, should be very easy. This match actually went really smoothly. Of course, them not playing damage reduction was really helpful, but overall it just played out really well, and it was a lot of fun. So a missile just for that extra little bit of damage. We definitely had to trade off there. And we're set up for our Anne's Sorcery. Especially since they played Purge. So 100% lethal with this Anne's Sorcery now. It's at like 17 damage or something crazy. Or 19, sorry, wow. Even more than I expected. Which is pretty nuts for a card like that. So now on to Swordcraft, a craft that seems to be doing really well in the current meta, honestly. I was a little surprised. I expected it to take at least a little bit of a backseat to things like Shadow, for example, but I've definitely seen more Sword in the last day or two than I have Shadow on ladder, which is definitely an impressive thing, considering how oppressive Shadow currently is. So there is the Mysterian knowledge, always a good start when you have Anne in your hand, especially when you have two of them. So we're starting off a little rough. I'm probably just going to have to go for Magic Mentor. There's not really any other option. If I played anything else, we probably would have been too much on the back foot, and that would have been a little disappointing. Of course, they're stealing my last word effect, not that they can actually take advantage of it. That one was a little disappointing. But not the end of the world. I mean, we're getting more boosts on these than we could ever really need, especially in the early game. Turn 4 Light Mage is actually really solid with the Evo, so that's going to be super promising. But even better, we actually have the Mentor, which is going to work out well as well. Being able to potentially use him to its fullest will be absolutely amazing. Especially now that we've pretty much buffed these things as far down as we're going to need them. Turn 5 is actually looking really fun. Definitely a fun matchup for me. Basically just whittling down their resources in the early game and using the big bodies as kind of the way to finish them off. It's definitely similar to how Daria decks were played out. Mysteria just kind of swarms the board with decent followers you use as defensive units while you build up a big kind of finisher, which is similar to what Daria was basically doing, flooding the board repeatedly to get in that damage so that you can finish off with one or two big finishes. Queen Mangus Black is definitely not a card I have a problem with. Unfortunately, I can't remove these with spells, which is the only real downfall. Probably should have went all face and just played Mysterian right in that, but clearing these out is usually going to be fine. And there wasn't really much reason not to at this point. And now I can set up my Sorcery, since Sword typically doesn't run any big board clears, so clearing this is not going to be the easiest thing without any Evos for them. It's definitely going to cost them some cards. Interesting. Jiraiya, not a card you see a lot. And now Mysterian Circle, into Light Mage, into a Missile. Really couldn't have got much better than that. Plus the Evo to get it right into my hand for next turn, so we have a decent turn 8 play with the Mysterian Rat and probably a Mysterian Worm, depending on what we would have wanted, but of course our opponent did end up conceding, making the match pretty easy. So this deck definitely was a lot of fun to play. As I mentioned, Mysteria decks are pretty straightforward and simple. Mysteria is a reasonably new archetype, at least for Rune in general, as it was added fairly late into the cycle of cards compared to a lot of other archetypes, excluding, say, Loot, which is probably one of the most recent. But it's still super solid. I'm sure they'll keep adding to it, even just little by little. We've seen a usually 1 or 2 card support for most kind of archetypes as we've gone on, especially big things. It'd be really nice to see a full set dedicated to Mysteria, so where it's the main focus and a lot of things referenced to Mysteria, especially with the upcoming anime adaptation, Mysteria and Friends, which has been taken off from being cancelled and is being worked on again, I believe. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content. You will find the deck list in the description below. Until next time, see ya.